Yes, welcome everyone, and thank you all very much for coming. This afternoon, we're going to have a discussion about issues that affect women at the workplace, in specific terms, women in academia or higher education. We can all see change, and there is hope and light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to always carry on. We have to plow on, keep plowing through till we definitely see the change we want to see. Then we have to keep digging till the end, to the bottom of the bucket to come up with the challenges or talk about the uncomfortable issues that would lead to that change. So this afternoon, I'm fortunate to have three incredible ladies this afternoon. These ladies have been so supportive of the Academic Woman magazine. They've shared their inspirational stories. Please, people, check out issues 2 and 3. You will read about Emily in issue 2 and Amal and Ilaria. Is that right? Ilaria,
yeah.
In issue 3. So please, yes, if you read their stories, you'd understand why they are here with us this afternoon to have this conversation we're going to have. So Amal is a doctoral researcher and associate lecturer at Newcastle Business School of Northumbria University. And then we have Emily. So I'll leave their research bits out because we've got all those covered in their profiles. And Emily is a senior lecturer in international human resource management at Portsmouth Business School. And we've got Ilaria, who is a professor of management and marketing and the Deputy Dean of Education for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at the University of Essex. So as I said, we've been fortunate to have the profiles of these three incredible women on Academic Woman. Please visit us at academicwoman.co.uk and subscribe to our newsletter in the magazine and read about their inspirational stories. As we start, I would encourage people to share their thoughts, share questions, or share their experiences in the chat box. So we're already behind schedule, so I'll move on to ask the first question. And I will direct this to a very determined early career academic. Amal, what drives your passion and motivation to prove your worth and capability?
First, I would like to thank you again for having us today. It's wonderful to be with you today. I think there has been so many experiences. Some of them are very recent as well, that keeps me want to prove that we are here, I exist, women exist. Some of them are very personal, like miscarriage or pregnancy. Having these experiences as a woman in the workplace are very challenging and challenge you a lot to, not to prove your worth, but to say that you can keep going. And the other experiences is mainly, I think the majority of us are experiencing it, especially in academia, sexism. And for me as a woman of color, it's racism as well. It feels like the system was not built to support these intersectionalities. And this creates always the motive and the drive that I exist, I will show that I can exist. Of course, it's difficult. You need this stamina to say that you can be there. I will do my best to exist. So I would say these are the experiences that always motivate me to keep going.
Yeah. That's impressive. We move on to, you talked about issues about miscarriage, pregnancy. Ilaria, for example, is someone who believes in sharing personal experiences at the workplace. So I'll direct this question to Ilaria. What informed your viewpoint on these issues?
So thank you for that. And again, for having me. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily pro-sharing. I would say that I'm against silencing. So I think people, should feel free to share or not, but they should have the option. I think now, as you mentioned, I've been studying parenting in academic careers and more broadly miscarriage or baby loss. And I think the issue is that, like Amal suggested, there is a kind of like the system was built for a very kind of a masculine, disembodied ideal of what a professional is. And this also means that a professional, in theory, is someone who is detached from their bodies and their feelings and their family, which obviously I disagree with. I don't think that you can, switch off that side of your being the moment you set foot in your organization or switch on a Zoom meeting. So I think it's really important that people are within an environment that I wouldn't say safe, because I think, obviously people experience safety or the lack thereof in very different ways because of their, their context and their own, identities or their own circumstances. But I think a caring system or a caring work environment where people have the option to share if they want to, and also, then create organizational discourses around it. And that's what I'm hoping to see more of.
Okay. And on that, around the same issue, Emily has conducted research that shed a light on some of the issues that women face in the workplace or in academia. Emily, how important is it that we bring these issues to light and talk about them?
Yeah, absolutely. And like both Amal and Ilaria, thank you for hosting us for this important conversation this afternoon. I think, having these conversations is important, not only in normal times, if you will, but now as we find ourselves in a global pandemic, it's even more important to be having these conversations and to be having those conversations frankly and openly, because what's important to remember is that, people don't find themselves in this context coming from the same starting point. Inequality, various inequalities, intersectional inequalities were already very much there before the pandemic. So I think it's important to create spaces where not only these issues can be talked about, but where we can share ideas and solutions for driving change as well, and thinking about how do we resist, how do we contribute positively to social justice and social change, and really think about redistributing power and wealth on a global scale as well. So I think, yes, it's extraordinarily important to have these conversations, but it's also very important to think about how we can all contribute to moving that, taking that to the next level to drive change as well. And again, not just in the academic sphere, but in the socio-political sphere as well.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely been a shift from equality to equity of opportunity now, because personal circumstances differ. And I would direct this to Amal, because looking at personal circumstances, looking at issues of race, you mentioned race earlier, does it have any impact on your urge to resist and challenge the status quo, to influence change?
Definitely. Because I wouldn't say, though, that I feel resist is a very big word that I don't have the privilege to resist. But I think what I can do is just to do my best to get my voice out there, and I will ensure to get my voice out there. That's what I always try to do. So racism is very well embedded in the institution, and sometimes it's very masked in people's faces that you are not sure if they are allies or they are actually racist. So I think it's very, very important to be aware of when these masks are starting to drop off. And this is when you start to say, no, that's it. I should resist this system. This is part of the system. This is the continuity of the system. we should pause and start to think how this should be brought into light and shed light on it. So from here, you can start to bring some conversations about it. But again, as Emily said, this brings us back to the uneven power distribution and where you stand in the academic hierarchy. So for someone like me who is very well aware of their positionality as an early career researcher, PhD student, single parent, woman of color, all these intersectionalities position me in a very, like, at the very bottom of the food chain of academia. But yet I should try my best to get my voice out there. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So talking about that, I think we all need environments where you'd have that sense of belonging, where there's respect, where you are able to, talk. Because if you look at to whether we like it or not, we all kind of have our unconscious biases somehow, even with the best intentions. Sometimes things we say or things we do can go across in the wrong way. So I'll direct this to Ilaria, that how do we lead conversations on respect and belonging at the workplace?
Big question. I think it needs to be premised on three things. So the first thing is that diversity shouldn't just be tolerated or accommodated, but should be actually embraced and valued in an organization, whether it's academia or somewhere else, doesn't matter. The second thing stemming from that, I would say that it should be acknowledged that inclusion doesn't mean assimilation. So very often we think of inclusion in a very also sort of neoliberal way, whereby the individual has to be entrepreneurial and fit in or lean in, and that's not necessarily the case, I would suggest. And then the other thing, kind of building on what you said, Anato, is that we need to move from equality to equity. So equality is about giving everyone the same opportunity, and then equity is recognizing that people have different starting points, and so they have different circumstances and different needs. So actually, if you give everyone the same opportunity, sometimes you're just reproducing kind of like oppression or marginalization. And then I think if we start from there, then we can look at sort of the various layers of the organizational culture. So looking at, the actual culture and the values of the organization and how those are made visible, not just in terms of like marketing and box ticking in like awards or rankings, but really, in the lived experience of the organization at all levels. So how do we change our policies? How is our behavior? How are people responsible for their behaviors? How are made accountable for their behaviors? How can we, make a really big impact on the daily lives of people in organizations? So I think that I would say that's how we need to work backwards, rather than thinking at the individual level and kind of like just the one-to-one interaction. We need to build it from kind of like the systemic level to the organizational level to the individual level.
That's brilliant. So talking about what needs to change, when do you identify when this needs to happen at the institutional level, or even on a personal level, because people make the institutional structures, don't we? So when do you think change needs to happen?
So this might sound a bit idealistic, but I think change should always happen, because until everyone is allowed to flourish, then we need change. And I think change very often in organizations is sort of something that is disruptive, or something that has like a rhythm, like every 5 years we review our policies, but actually it shouldn't be like that. It should be, as Amal was saying before, so institutions, organizations are places of power, privilege, and marginalization, right? And so those dynamics are always at play. And so those dynamics mean that not everyone has the same level of privilege, opportunity, or, the system doesn't foster equity or equality. So So I think it's really important that we recognize that change has to happen continuously, and also that the burden of change is not just placed on the individual, but on, it's a shared it's a shared project, and it's also a political project also, I think, because of these inequalities, and also that there are different types of power and different sort of mechanisms of control that we can challenge and change. So not just changing a policy or a person, but we can think of how we can resist, for example, and who is allowed to resist, and how we can facilitate resistance, and how we can have more for example, caring approaches, and how we can have more, person-centered approaches.
Thank you very much. And talking about, the whole issue of equity and equality, and seeing that change. If you look across university leadership at the higher education level, yes, even though we have a good number of women in academia now, in terms of leadership, we only have quite a very small number. I will direct this to Emily. Emily, what is your take on university leadership, especially with regards to gender quotas?
Yeah, sure. Fantastic question. Thank you, Anatu. I think what's important to forefront in any of these conversations is that we need to start at the point of not blaming the women, but looking at the problems within the system, systemic issues and structural issues, and fixing the system. And essentially it's one of the biggest questions, is, well, okay, we can, to refer back to your first question, okay, is it important to talk about this? Yes. Are we having those conversations? Yes, absolutely. Is that is that occurring in an echo chamber? Possibly, but how do we kind of drive that change? And what we need to do is think about not only having robust, inclusive and sustainable policies in place, that to draw on what Ilaria was talking about as well, policies that are organic in how they develop to an extent as well, not part of this, strategic change that occurs every 5 years or whatever the kind of the cycle or the rhythm of the organization might be, but for that to be an integral part of organizational life, to say, well, actually, when we encounter issues, to follow those up straight to and think about practices and policies as something that is dynamic in everyday organizational life. To touch upon the element of your question around quotas, and this is really something that, and I published a paper a while ago about the use of quotas in the Welsh Labour Party, and quotas are, and the notion of quotas are incredibly divisive, and I think it is important to acknowledge some of the issues with quotas, but the more I think about this, and the more kind of work I do in this area, I do tend to reach the conclusion that I think I don't present quotas as a panacea, but rather as a facet of broader policies and practices in organizations such as universities to aid women's representation. But we also then, where it then becomes kind of where I struggle a little bit in my thinking is, well, how do we account for the intersectional needs for representation as well? So it's also about thinking about, well, what are the boundaries around quotas. What else needs to be happening? And what we need is kind of more holistic approaches. But it's very difficult. We know that in UK universities, as well as universities around the world, there are significant issues of vertical gender segregation. There are issues of racial representation as well. There are various inequalities that come to the fore in what are traditionally very hierarchical organizations, elitist organizations, and universities are a neoliberal context, particularly if we think about North America and the UK. They are exclusionary spaces by their very history and by their very nature. They're gendered, they're racialized, they're class. These are deeply problematic spaces. So quotas, whatever those quotas might take the shape of, is not going to solve everything, but rather what we need is changes in organizational culture. And that's easy to say, but cultural change in an organization is one of the most difficult things to drive and to achieve. And we've spoken this afternoon already about change in the organization. And I think what's imperative to think about when we think about change is also resistance to change. And in any environment where we see vast levels of inequality, we're also going to see vast levels of resistance to change. And that tends to come from those who hold privilege. And in universities, that is still disproportionately, older white men who are, in the UK context, disproportionately privately educated as well. And I think that's another thing that we need to think about is class in the university. And that is, class is still not a protected characteristic in terms of, it's not a protected characteristic, and that's still something that has a huge influence on people's lived experiences of organizational life today. So a bit of a long-winded response to your question, but we need to really think about resistance in organizations, I think, and how that reacts and interacts with organizational culture and climate.
So obviously, to bring about change, I think, like I said earlier on, it's all still about, digging up those challenges that we continue to face. So I would just ask Amal, at what point do you decide you have to speak out? Anybody can add to this after Amal has spoken, but at what point do you feel you have to speak out, whether it's relating to stereotypes, gender inequality, race issues? When do you have your voice heard?
That's a very tricky question. I will try my best, but I would say I fully agree with Ilaria. For me, the answer is always, but the question for me is who and where and the what. When is always there. I always want to speak up, but again, speaking from my own intersectionality or my own positionality, I need to think more about how my voice could be out there in a system that was designed to silence my voice, specifically my voice. So the when I will always try, but the who and the where is critical. So the where, as we spoke earlier, organizations and institutions, specifically academia, they are not built as spaces for people to share, but rather for people to reproduce, whether privilege, whether marginalization, whether silencing. So the where for me is very important, because if you are going to have a voice, you need to ensure that you are visible, initially visible, so your voice is heard. And again, the issue of visibility brings us back to the power. Who holds power? Who holds power to have a voice, and who doesn't hold power to be silenced? But I think what is really critical and very important for me as a person is the who. It's very important, very, very important to always have these conversations with others, because we never know. For example, if I've been through a racist experience, or I received a very harsh sexist comments. If I just kept it for myself, it would be a very, very isolated experience. So I think having those people, you can build a trust, and having care for one another can initially bring this sense of comfort that you can belong. You might not belong to the bigger space or place, but you can belong within these small spaces of solidarity. And I think this is the who is very important for me, to have this conversation with people and let them know that they are not alone. So I am not alone as well. So sharing this conversation, having my voice with these people is the thing that I always try to do. You are muted, Anatu.
Anatu, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, I'm all talking about the who. It's part of the access for this conversations we're having, because the whole point is for us to share this experiences. So I'll just urge people who are in the chat, or people who are participating, if you have any comments or experiences to share in the chat, please go ahead. Or just raise up your hand, and then we'll give you a chance to share your experience as well with us. That's the whole point, isn't it? To share those experiences and then see how we can influence the change. Yes, thank you, Amal. Emily and Ilaria, do you have anything to add to this? Because clearly it's all about breaking those barriers, because institutions have been built on certain values, the traditional patriarchal systems and everything. How do you break those barriers? How do we keep forging on?
In my experience, it depends on the barrier you want to break, how big it is, and who is helping you do that. So I think what Amal was reflecting on is really important. And, obviously you cannot change a whole system on your own in a week. So, sometimes you have to have kind of like a war plan with like little battles in between, and look for allies and people who will fight with you. One thing that I wanted just to add in terms of resistance for change that I think Emily was talking about is that very often in organizations there is sort of formal resistance, and there is also informal resistance, and resistance can be a positive thing or a negative thing. So it can be resistant against change when you're the person with the privilege and you don't want that privilege questioned or changed. But those networks or groups or communities of belonging are really important to enact this resistance for change and create solidarity that can also spread. Like we've seen that, for example, in academic practice, in terms of, who is allowed to publish what and when, and, by doing things together, I think also you can gain momentum and a bit more strength in your battle sometimes.
Emily, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really in agreement with both Amal and Ilaria here, and that it's really about, I think also about showing kindness and compassion to other people, be that in the workplace, be that in our social lives, be that in whatever context it is, but also this idea of critical mass, I think is is absolutely central. You know, no social change ever happened from really just from one person alone. And really this idea of coming together and sharing our struggles can be incredibly powerful, both at the individual level. You know, that can and indeed I've had different experiences around gender and also around homophobia and lots of different things like that. And I think that having that community, that solidarity can be a real, not just a mechanism of survival, but a real lifeline for people and give strength, but ultimately to make change and to counter resistance to change, whatever that might be. We need that critical mass and shared voices to come together more loudly. But I think it's a lot of what we're talking about today and in other fora as well is about actually showing care and concern to other people, and making a concerted effort to think about how can I support my peers as well. And for me, that's something that's really important.
Can I just
go on, Em.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, building on what Emily was saying of sharing struggles. And I remember, so we have this kind of, like, as I said, disembodied or kind of like masculine idea of like what a career is and what success means. And, you know, I have a huge imposter syndrome. I've always had it in everything I've done in my life. And sometimes seeing, you know, I remember as an early career, but even today, like seeing people you think of, you know, these like super professors who are editors in chief or this and that, and you thinking, you know, oh, it must be so easy for them to publish. And I love it when they say, you know, actually I'm struggling with the kids, I'm really tired, or I got this paper got rejected 3 times, and, you know, my line manager is not flexible. And actually demystifying what success means and what like a career trajectory means, and what, you know, what it feels like to be, whether you're in academia or not, like in a high position or a higher hierarchical, you know, status. And I think it's really important to share that as well.
Yes, any comments or questions? Okay, I think we've got one question here. I think we'll take that before we carry on with the list of questions I've got. We're nearly there anyway. Can you share this is from Zahira. Can you share your experience with managing academic work and maternity leave and childcare? Would love to hear your thoughts on the 90% maternity pay and expensive childcare costs. I feel like it makes it difficult for women to progress in their career because the system is not supportive.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if Amal wants to come in, but actually the project that I was talking about before with Emily and I and Charlie Smith are working at the moment is about parenting in academic careers. And, you know, I think there are lots of different dynamics. When I had, so, you know, not even considering baby loss in terms of pregnancy, but here, you know, I'm a foreigner. Well, I'm British, but I'm also, you know, my family is in Italy. My husband's family is not here either. And so, you know, childcare in the UK is really expensive. And you know, having even more than one child in childcare is really expensive. And that has a whole, you know, it has a whole implication for, you know, job security, whether you're part-time or not part-time, you know, whether your partner or your spouse is able to share the childcare, if you have a partner or a spouse. You know, there is all the kind of like the social expectation of mothers who need to be the main carers, and, you know, the men need to be the breadwinners. And unfortunately, that's still, you know, kind of like the general assumption, at least in many contexts that I've worked in. And it is really a struggle, you know. I think there is Maria do Mar Pereira has a book on it's an ethnography on academic careers, and towards the end she mentioned something about the fact that, you know, it's really difficult nowadays to have time for thinking and reading and, you know, doing things that are really part of your job as an academic. And I never have time for all that. And I'm always thinking about papers, while cooking dinner, and, you know, it is really a struggle. Like, talking about juggling is like another level of juggling, I think. I don't know what Amal and Emily feel about this.
I think I agree with all what you said. And for me, it is extremely difficult, especially as a single parent, not only as a single parent, but also as a foreigner. I'm an international student. I'm living in the UK, as well as an associate lecturer, which means I'm in an extremely precarious position. Not only the ontological security, as they say, that I'm experiencing, insecurity that I'm experiencing, but also how the income for you as a single parent and as someone who's on an hour contract or a part-time contract, whatever, those zero contracts, so many contracts, all of them are mostly being held by women, is very tricky. And then you find yourself struggling between your identities. And this is one of the things that I discussed explicitly in one of my papers, actually the first paper I published in the pandemic, on how we try to juggle, and in the middle of juggling, we lose ourselves. We're not sure who we are anymore because there's so much going on. And this, as I think Emily said this, how the system was built to support the ideal worker who is zero childcare, zero homeschooling, for example, responsibilities. And it's not easy. It's very difficult. And I was wondering how this could change. But for this to be changed, again, we need to bring this to bring our voice and talk about and have these conversations out there in publication, and bring more of the embodied experiences, especially on how women are constructed within the society to always have this feeling of guilt. You're guilty because you're leaving your children and you're working. You're guilty because you can't achieve what you want to do at your work because you have childcare responsibilities. So it's just a complicated issue, really.
Yeah, and talking about juggling, I missed my son's parents' evening 2 nights ago. I knew the meeting was taking place, but I completely forgot. I don't know how, but yes, that is what a lot of us go through. And this morning I have to remind myself that I can't do it all. Sometimes you forget these things happen. It's not the end of the world. So I suppose that is what we do, juggling, isn't it? Emily, do you have anything to add to this?
I don't have children, unfortunately, but I think what I would sort of add is that it really brings to the fore again the importance of these conversations. And you know what both Ilara and Amal were talking about is also, you know, having those spaces that are understanding and where you can find information as to, you know, what resources might be available, or in many cases what's not available as well, but being able to draw on the thoughts and experiences of others, to know that you're not alone in your experiences, be that, you know, that's the case in everyday life and within the organizations within which we find ourselves, which kind of are microcosms of the wider world. But I think what's also something that fascinates me, and I was talking about at another event this morning, is also around perceptions of women and perceptions of particular roles. So the context within which I was talking about it that this morning was in terms of research impact, but I think there's a link there to, you know, if if I suspect many of us have been in the situation where a man in the department or in the group picks up his child from school and sort of says very openly in a meeting, I have to go and pick up my child now, and sort of almost this like, and isn't that great? Look at me, sort of thing. Not everyone, of course. I don't want to pursue essentialist arguments here, but it's very much about how what people are having to deal with and struggle with is perceived. Whereas, you know, and I think that's problematic and endemic of wider societal expectations around who do we think does certain things. That a very clear example of that has been, you know, throughout the pandemic, whenever the government has used visual imagery about, you know, what a family looks like or what a household looks like, most of the time, you know, it's a picture of the mum and the dad, and the mum doing the homeschooling, and that imagery is dangerous, and those heteronormative assumptions and idealized sort of visuals of what a family is or what a carer is are really something that we need to question and be further aware of.
And to be honest, you know, it applies to parenting, but it applies to lots of other issues of caring for elderly parents or a sick relative, or, you know, it actually can apply to more than parenting.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry, right. Emily, talking about, well, sorry, I had to stop and then reply to a chat. Right, talking about this, you know, and we talk about all the stereotypes and the picture that is created of what a female should look like, what a male should look like, or what a male should be doing and what a female should be doing. And as we all talked about earlier, our institutions are built on certain values. And as women, if you can see the glass ceiling is great, isn't it? Then you know you'll be able to reach it. But, you know, should we worry about those other ceiling that, you know, that we can see through, those things that are not really getting us where we're supposed to get there?
I guess, again, it's a great question, but a difficult one. I guess it's about understanding not only what the roadblocks are necessarily, but thinking about where they are coming from and why they're there. And I think it also again goes back to that idea of critical mass, and how do we positively contribute to change in terms of whatever that, be that the glass ceiling, be that whatever. Different people will experience and witness different barriers and be influenced and affected differently by different barriers. And I for me, my thinking, I often come back to a systems approach and thinking about, well, let me be a little bit more specific, a humanistic systems approach, and thinking about how do we have policies, and not only policies and practices in place, but systems that are fluid but structured enough to change, but also to protect people. So what I think is important here is not to say, well, actually, how do we make sure certain groups can smash through those barriers themselves, but rather think about how can we, if we use the metaphor of a police shield at a protest, not thinking about, well, how do the people in front of those shields who are vulnerable and unprotected potentially, how do they smash through those shields, but rather thinking about how do we dismantle the systems and the parties and the systems behind that create that wall. So to sort of mobilize that a little bit, thinking again, not about problematizing the women or the caregivers or whoever it might be, but thinking about how do we create change within the systems that are perpetuating and contributing and creating and holding up those ceilings. How do we make the change there? I think, apologies if that was a bit
No, I think that is what needs to happen. We need to all keep working and then working towards that change, and it comes in different forms. So I would just direct this to Amal, that how can we engage others? Because when we are able to improve equality and diversity, hopefully there'll be some more transparency and there'll be more inclusion as well. That's what we hope for, isn't it? Yes, Amal, how can we engage others to improve equality and diversity?
I think it starts, for me, I believe it starts from me as a person. How can I improve myself as a person? How can I be more aware and mindful of my own biases? And how can I engage with them critically, and how this can influence my behavior with others. I really like Sara Ahmed's example of living as a feminist as practice every day in your everyday life. How can you embrace these qualities within you first before engaging with others? And I would like to add this to what Emily was saying. It is very important for us not to have those individualistic approaches toward equality. For this to happen, it needs to be like micro-organizing or micro-mobilization. Those people who are like us, how can we move together so we together can challenge those systems? How can we challenge racism? How can we challenge sexism, misogyny? How can we do this together? One of the very simple approaches could be in this new liberal individualistic sector like academia in the UK. How can we work together to bring more a collective? This is what I really like a lot, and this is what I try to do as a person and as a researcher, as a scholar. How can I bring others together to create those spaces where we can collectively move to bring change, not even for the institution, but even for us? How can we influence one another? How can we change ourselves and then influence others' thoughts as well?
That's brilliant. Yeah, we work on ourselves first and then move it all the way up. I would direct this to Ilaria. So what can be achieved when institutions open up for dialogue on issues that affect us at workplaces?
Sorry, say that again.
What can be achieved when institutions open up for dialogue? When we, for instance, in your institution, if you open up for dialogue on those uncomfortable conversations, what can we achieve? What can be achieved?
Well, I think the first step is awareness and recognition. And I think, problematization of taken for granted things that were not even recognized as issues before, I think. And I think, an honest, reflexive look inwards and outwards to see how kind of like the two sides can work together. And I mean, ultimately, we could get, flourishing for all members of an institution or organization. Obviously, that will take time, and it will take a lot of commitment, a lot of emotional labor, together with normal organizational labor. But obviously, it could really be transformational for individuals and the organization. And wouldn't you want to work in a place like that?
Of course. Yeah. Anyone else has something to add? Okay, I think at this point, we'd like to thank our panel very, very much. Thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. Let me just quickly check. I think there's a question here. Okay, so this is from Nadia. What are if any, the chances to build up those network of solidarity and push an actual change through institutional tools such as Athena Swan?
Nadia, please feel free to get in touch with me afterwards. I know we're running out of time, but there is quite a lot of work on kind of like Athena Swan, that the good and the bad, and like the race equality charter, for example, when it's like a box ticking exercise or like a propaganda exercise, or whether it actually has proper engagement from individuals and the organizations and can change things. So yeah, please get in touch. Really happy to talk about that further with you.
Yeah, right, Nadia, sorry, Anatu. Yeah, Nadia, happy for you to reach out to myself as well. I'm also just completing a project looking at the efficacy of Athena Swan, and we specifically explore that kind of notion of perfunctory tick box exercises and organizations showing off about certain things that they're doing and investing in, but no real change occurring, and that kind of dichotomy as well. So happy for people to get in touch with myself as well.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. From some of the comments here, yes, thank you for this insightful dialogue. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and most of all experiences. Thank you very much. So obviously, we've all enjoyed this, and we thank you all very much. I have personally enjoyed it, and clearly others have too. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
And it's lovely to see you all.
Lovely.
Thank you very much, Anatu, and thank you to everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.